I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone in Bowling Green or listening on the internet, wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Joseph D. DeMare, and I'm here with my perspicacious co-host,
Rebecca Wood, who also does not know how to say that word.
For the next hour, Rebecca and I will be bringing you an interesting and informative program called For a Green Future. This is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, and the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the health of the worms living in the mud at the bottom of the lakes, and the eagles roosting on the mountain tops, the moles tunneling through your yard, and the squirrels jumping around in the trees, because like it or not, we are wrapped up together on this singular planet called Earth, and we all need to make room for each other, because if we don't, we're the ones that might get bumped off.
You're darn tootin'.
So, you may have noticed that I am not Shabazz Khan, and I am also not the original host of the program, who, according to the interpretation that Cumulus Broadcasting follows, must not be named. It looks like I will be your guest host, at least until November, and I'm looking forward to working with you. From now until November, the show will be pre-recorded, which means we'll have higher sound quality and a smoother production, but it also means that you won't be able to call in during the program. We do want your input, though, so you will be able to call in and leave your comments or send texts to 419-973-5841. Again, that's 419-973-5841. Of course, you can also send emails to joe@joedemare4agreenfuture.org. The format for the rest of the show will remain the same. We're going to just have a little chat for the next 10 minutes or so. Then we have an excellent interview with Sleydo, also called Molly Wickham. We first interviewed her way back in 2020 because of her fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline in Canada. Since our interview, the fight is continuing as fiercely as ever, even as the pipeline company pushes closer and closer to completing it.
That was a pretty dramatic interview, wasn't it? I think I remember that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bad stuff was going down.
Yes, we have been following the battle as protesters were brutalized by police, and the resistance did turn violent at times. The whole issue has taken on a new urgency as global warming has entered the runaway stage. The carbon that pipeline is supposed to transport must never be put into the atmosphere. After that interview comes messages from our sponsors and patrons. Then it will be time for Rebecca to make her contribution. Rebecca, what will you be talking about this episode?
The jet stream.
All right, we'll be looking forward to that. As we've been doing all summer, we wanted to give you an update on the Canadian wildfires. Unfortunately, the Canadian government has not updated its fire situation report since August 2nd, At that point, there were 660 fires burning, with 225 out of control, and 13.1 million hectares burned. What has happened since then, we can only guess. It's possible that Canada's Prime Minister, Trudeau, currently on vacation this week somewhere in British Columbia, didn't want his vacation ruined by the news. His domestic energy policy is based on increasing exploitation of natural gas.
Let's hope he went to Maui.
Oh, shoot. Being reminded that the fossil fuels you're taking out of the ground are destroying your
I
country.
hear Lahaina is
Can be a real
nice
bummer.
this time of year.
Getting worse all the time.
Yes.
So, as I'm sure you know, this past week, Issue 1 was defeated in Ohio. This is a victory for the environment because Ohioans have preserved the ability to challenge suicidal anti-environmental policies like HB 6. Ohioans saw through the lies and double talk of the politicians who were pushing Issue 1. Maybe the biggest hypocrisy was claiming that Issue 1 would preserve Ohio's constitution, while Issue 1 itself would have radically rewritten it. While this is a victory, we must remember that it is not a gain. It was a successful defense against a direct attack on democracy. In order to actually gain ground, we have to now use the rights we've defended to force changes on the corrupt politicians in Columbus. The Issue 1 campaign was largely funded by an out-of-state billionaire named Uline. He owns the Uline mail order office supply company. Uline wrote out a $20 million check that started the whole sorry affair because he wanted to change Ohio's constitution and figured that was enough money to do the job. Happily, he was wrong, as ordinary Ohioans turned out in huge numbers to send Issue 1 burning to the ground by a 14-point margin. But the problem of money-buying policy is still the biggest threat to our democracy today. While occasionally billionaires like Uline step in with blatant attempts to rewrite laws, the biggest danger are the corporations who quietly, day after day, use their lobbyists and political donations to just control what happens in state house after state house around the country.
You know, what really annoys me about that whole business is, I think it was around 2000 or 2002, somewhere in there, when we actually, maybe 04 or something like that, when we first got the referendum, it was because they wanted to shove casinos down our throat.
Oh, shoot.
Not that casinos are the worst thing that could happen, but, it was because somebody wanted to do some corporate stuff and make some money, and now that people are using it for stuff that people want, they're like, oh no, it's dangerous. Mob rule.
It seems to be a theme when
Yes.
the population attempts to rise up. That's why an opinion piece in the online journal Bridge, Michigan on August 7th caught our attention. Juan Hongchun did a guest commentary entitled Ban Investor-Owned Utilities from Funding Political Campaigns. He began by pointing out that even as global warming is burning our planet down around us, utility companies all over the country are trying to stop the transition to wind and solar power. There are a few exceptions, of course. Hawaii and some utilities in the Northeast are actively encouraging solar power. But most utilities, like First Energy in Ohio, are doing what they can to stop them. For example, in House Bill 6, First Energy removed all subsidies for wind and solar and eliminated a revolving loan fund that cost Ohio nothing but saved Ohio businesses billions of dollars in utility costs. These bad policies are fueled by massive donations that the utilities make to buy politicians. In his opinion piece, Juan points out that 93% of Michigan lawmakers have taken donations from Detroit Energy, DTE, and Consumers Energy. As a result, these utilities now can deliver high-cost, low-reliability electricity without fear of any oversight or consequences from the state government. DTE has also managed to suppress wind and solar energy development. The state gets the largest share of its energy from coal, 32%, followed by nuclear and gas, 30% and 27%. These are the most offensive and expensive forms of energy available. Renewable is the least expensive, only make up 11% of Michigan's energy. That's why Michiganders have such high energy bills today and why their grid is so unreliable. But Juan doesn't just describe the problem, he proposes a solution. Colorado, Connecticut, and Maine have all passed laws that limit monopoly utilities from using ratepayer dollars to make campaign contributions. Right now, a substantial part of your electric bill goes to pay lobbyists who are lobbying to raise your electric bill. An Ohio without First Energy, AEP, or other utility companies dominating what happens in Columbus is hard to imagine, but it would be great. We just successfully defended one of the ways we could make that happen, being citizen-led referendums. Maybe it's time we tried. We don't particularly enjoy talking about political issues here on For a Green Future. We'd much rather focus on purely environmental stories, like Germany's creation of the Deutschland ticket. Now, in Germany, you only need to pay a monthly fee of 49 euros, and you can ride any bus or train anywhere in the country as many times as you need to. The plan was instituted in May and has resulted in a 25% increase in the use of local rail services and a corresponding drop in the use of gas-guzzling cars. That's a month's worth of unlimited transportation for about the same cost as a single tank of gas in the US. But unfortunately, we have to pay attention to politics, because it is politics that makes good policies like the Deutschland ticket possible. It's also politics that put bad policies like HB6 into place. As we've said many times here on For a Green Future, we have all the technology and knowledge that we need to stop global warming and make all of the world a clean, healthy environment again. You can go back and listen to our interviews with Dr. Mark Jacobson for more details on one aspect of the transition, being moving to a carbon-free economy. We have the technical ability, and we also have the desire. In polls, people consistently say that they want something done about global warming, or that they want us to switch to a carbon-free economy. The only thing preventing the majority from getting what they want is the political manipulations of a tyrannical minority. One of the first ways we have to stop putting carbon into the air is to stop creating more and more fossil fuel infrastructure. But we continue to do the opposite. The Trans Mountain Pipeline in Canada is a monstrous project. Over 700 miles long, it's intended to carry oil from the tar sands of Alberta all the way to the Canadian coast in British Columbia and down into Washington state. This project has ballooned to an insane 10 times over its original cost estimate. The federal government actually took the project over just to make sure it gets finished. Its ultimate purpose is to send fossil fuels to Asia. So there's been no benefit to Canadians or Americans, and incredible levels of ongoing environmental damage. Our guest this week has been fighting the pipeline with everything she's got for years and has made incredible sacrifices. We were one of the first to interview her in 2020, and we wanted to check back in with her and see what's happening. So here's our interview with Sleydo. Welcome to For a Green Radio. Today we have a very special guest, Sleydo, also known as Molly Wickham. She's on the ground, on the front lines in Canada. To start off with, could you give us your name and title?
My name is Sleydo. It's a wing chief name in Cassia House, and I'm the spokesperson for the Get 'em Done Checkpoint reoccupation village site.
Right. So the Coastal GasLink pipeline is a huge story with many different layers and aspects. We're not going to be able to cover it all in 15 minutes, but could you please start with a brief explanation of what the pipeline is and what it's supposed to do?
Sure. So the Coastal GasLink pipeline is a 670-kilometer pipeline that is proposed to bring fracked gas from northeastern so-called British Columbia to the coast to be shipped over to overseas markets, mostly Asian markets.
So we first interviewed you on this story back in 2020. At that time, you and others were living in your unceded territory in what is called British Columbia. What did the Canadian government do to those of you who were trying to stop this pipeline?
Well, in 2020, there was a large-scale militarized raid to the territory, with multiple arrests of many different campsites, many different support sites for, allegedly blocking or stopping the coastal or stopping the construction of the CGL pipeline. At that point, there was the eviction from the hereditary chiefs. And then again in 2021, there was another large-scale raid on the territory with multiple arrests. And right now we're still seeing the fallout of that in terms of court cases and trials coming up for a lot of our people that have been criminalized from this process on our territory for upholding our laws, which are in contrast to the colonial laws in so-called Canada.
Something that also happened at that time were protests in sympathy with your struggle that practically paralyzed the entire nation of Canada. Can you review a little bit of what happened then? And are those protest efforts ongoing?
So what happened in 2020 in response to the militarized raid on Wet'suwet'en territory and the police presence, the continued police presence on our territory, was what we called Shut Down Canada. And a lot of allies, a lot of supporters, a lot of people that were following along with the what was happening in our territory shut down major infrastructure all across so-called Canada, airports, railways, major government buildings and different government offices. And that really crippled the whole Canadian economy in a way that was interesting to see how fragile everything was and how easily disrupted that it was. And so the government came to the table with the Wet'suwet'en, the provincial and the federal government, to sign an MOU that saying that they would recognize our title to our territories. We've never ceded, surrendered, or lost in war any of our 22,000 square kilometers. And so what we realized since then is that that was actually just smoke and mirrors to stop the support blockades and to stop the support and show Canada that they resolved the issue and that everything was fine. We know that that's not the case. And then COVID happened. So a lot of things got disrupted and stopped because of the pandemic.
Right. Over the course of this project, it sounds like the government of Canada has brutally violated your rights and pushed the pipeline through much of your territory. On its website, TMC claims the pipeline is 91% complete. What kind of repercussions have there been for those of you carrying on the fight to this day? Are there still legal charges pending?
There are trials that are coming up this fall where myself, other Indigenous land defenders, and chiefs from our nation are facing jail time because of the resistance, because of us holding up our laws and protecting our territories. We still are experiencing severe police repression from all of the efforts that we've seen for uphold. And I think it's really important that people understand that we are not, we're being criminalized in the media, we're being criminalized by the state, but what we're doing is upholding Wet'suwet'en law, and that's all that we're doing is protecting our territories. We have every right to do that. Our laws say that we have a responsibility to do that. We continue to have police surveilling and harassing and intimidating our people on a daily basis. Our territories are still crawling with police and private security everywhere, filming our every move, following us to and from our homes. And so the repression that we're seeing is really scary in, a so-called democratic country where it's not supposed to be a police state. And they're actually being, the KERG, which is the special unit of police that have been hired to do the tactics or carry out the tactics of repression. for the state is actually being under review by the Canadian Review Complaints Commission. So there's an investigation into what's happening. Is being watched by international bodies in the UN. And yeah, it's an ongoing state of repression in our communities, and it's also an ongoing slippery slope of what can happen and what's going to happen to other Indigenous people and other movements to protect the land, and I think that regular Canadians or people that feel like they live in a democratic country are their eyes are being opened to the fact that, industry and money is going to be made by industry and the state at any cost to human rights, to Indigenous rights. And we're seeing clear examples of that happening on a continued basis. And many of us face jail time for upholding our rights.
Isn't it true that everything you feared would happen with the pipeline construction since the beginning? That is, fish have been killed, water polluted, forests ruined, everything the pipeline company denied would happen has happened?
Absolutely. And they're doing it. All of these things continue to happen with, no accountability. We have the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Environmental Assessment Office, all these government regulatory bodies that are supposed to be protecting the fish, the habitat, the wildlife. They're not stepping up and doing the work, which is why we, as the Indigenous people, the title holders of these territories, the ones that have responsibilities to these territories, have to do it, because our salmon spawning areas are being destroyed. Our clean drinking water has been destroyed. There's been, leaks of tailings into the groundwater under Witsinqua, which is our sacred headwaters. There's been fines and stop work orders, multiple stop work orders issued by government bodies. And then for literally destroying wetlands, for destroying fish habitat, for destroying clean water, our ability to drink the water, which is what we've been fighting so hard for. And, and we continue to, and we have to do it because the government bodies that are put in place that are supposed to be protecting these things are not doing their job.
Right now, Canada is experiencing incredible wildfires, partially as a result of global warming. What have you seen in the way of fire and smoke over there? Also, isn't it kind of crazy that the Canadian government is still trying to pursue these kinds of huge fossil fuel infrastructure projects, even as the nation is burning?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think that anybody can deny the climate crisis that's happening right now in our territories. We've had to set up our own sprinkler systems this year because of such dry, extreme fire conditions. We've had, up to 20 to 30 wildfires on the INTA this year so far, where we've had, evacuation alerts, whole towns and cities. They had to bring in the Canadian military to help protect one of our communities in our territory because of wildfires. We've just been surrounded all summer, and we just are finally starting to see some relief because of the rain has finally come. But this is what we can expect. And a lot of these fires too are right along the pipeline route. Industry keeps carrying on when the pipeline keeps carrying on when other industries have stopped because of the extreme fire hazards. And it's scary to think that, I've had an evacuation boxes and bins and bags packed all summer long. And we've had to pack up our communities at Gidimt'en Checkpoint, at my home on the territory, at other occupation sites on the territory that we've almost lost this year. Within 1 kilometer, one of the other clans has a reoccupation site that the fire was 1 kilometer away, that everybody was evacuated, and we almost lost that completely because of the wildfires this year.
Wow, that's terrible. There has been news that Canada wants to turn the ownership of the pipeline over to indigenous tribes. From the beginning, this battle has been a conflict between the traditional leaders and the government-approved leaders of the tribes. Could you summarize that conflict? And what do you think of the proposal to put the ownership of the pipeline onto the tribe?
I think that it's a ploy to stop resistance
Right.
to the pipeline, because if they're saying and they can show that the indigenous people are so-called benefiting from it, and I use air quotes when I say benefiting from it, because we know that nobody is benefiting from this. Even people that are, going to get a few $1,000,000 or a few $100,000 are that money is not going to last. And then we're going to be left to clean up the mess. If our so-called nations, under the Indian Act bans are going to be owning parts of any industry or any pipeline, we're the ones that are going to be handed off the responsibility of that when it spills, when the disasters start happening, because they will. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so they don't want to have that responsibility. And they also don't want other Indigenous nations, because of the movement that has been started because of this pipeline and the resistance to this pipeline, that's spread. And so many more nations are standing up. So many more nations and supporters are working together. And that's going to continue to grow. And so if they can say, hey, you can't be against this because this is Indigenous owned, then that's their way of trying to get out, to stop the resistance, to stop the growth of the movement that's happening.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Sleydo. If any of our listeners want more information, how can they get into contact with your movement?
They can follow us our website at yintaaccess.com. And we have a Facebook page, an Instagram account, and Twitter that are all linked to our website.
Any final comments for our listeners down here?
Well, thank you so much for continuing to follow along and to share our story. I think that it's important because this affects all of us. We're one small nation in a different part of the world, but all of these issues are connected to the larger health and well-being of all of us.
Well, it's the least we can do to draw attention to this kind of environmental disaster that's ongoing just a little bit north of us. So Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Sleydo for that interview. And now we have a message from our sponsors.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. These are people who've gone to patreon.com, that's patreon.com, and searched for a Green Future. There, they signed up to have a small donation come out of their accounts every month. We thank our patrons because without them, we couldn't do this show. All right, Rebecca, your turn at the mic. What do you have for us this week?
Alrighty, well, I wanted to talk about the jet stream because it's a big, important thing that I don't really have a complete handle on, frankly. So yeah, I got some information. A lot of this is from Bloomberg on way back on July 20th, 23. Article by Brian K. Sullivan. So the extreme heat, one of the things behind it, one of the things that this gets, thrown around in connection with some of the wildfires we're having, is happening because high and low pressures are not, zones are not moving. The jet stream is connected to the jet stream, which is a meandering river of wind that encircles the globe and creates our weather, according to Jennifer Francis, climate scientist, who describes it as unusually stuck in place. So this is why
a recent development.
Yeah, this year basically,
This year.
it's not moving like it is supposed to. So yeah, the multiple devastating heat domes and flooding events around the northern hemisphere are indeed connected. It turns out. Examples: wildfires in Greece and Switzerland, floods in India, in China, eastern U.S. They all have to do with weather teleconnections. It has to do with El Nino, and also the high pressure over the southern U.S. ensures that low pressure in the northeast, for example. So you get a dome, and then downstream, using downstream to refer to the jet stream. Downwind really is
Downcountry.
Yeah, where you get the rain and stuff. Teleconnections are defined as weather in one area affecting weather far away. So, for example, heat domes in North Africa and Asia are causing floods in China and heavy rain downstream, quote unquote, in Japan. Extremely warm oceans also helping to maintain the heat waves. According to the Financial Times, also on 7/20/2023, by Camilla Hodgson and Stephen Bernard, heat domes created by at least 5 large U-bend shapes called wave number 5. So they're making weird shapes that we don't usually see, apparently. The domes tend to form south of the U-bends, and the heat domes keep clouds from entering their area, which would help cool the temperatures. Just a hot day, you're sitting out somewhere and on a bus stop maybe or wherever, and a cloud comes by and you're like, oh, that feels nice, not happening. And also the high pressure in the heat domes keeps hot air from escaping, and then the air is forced downward. The hot air is forced downward because it's being compressed, and it's releasing heat as it sinks. And then the heat causes the ground to lose moisture, and the ground with no moisture heats up faster, which almost sounds a little bit like that positive feedback loop that Joe's always talking about. That he who shall not be named likes to refer to. So
several miniature greenhouse effects, according to the U-bends.
Yeah, kind of. So that's why the weirdness is going on.
Wow.
I really did not know, except for it was some way connected, probably, to the larger issues with climate change.
Well, that's a fantastic spotlight on a not well-known area of the climate. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
We turn now to the ecological news part of our show. We first go to Australia, where on August 10th, RenewEconomy.au ran a story titled, "Too Expensive, Too Slow. Australia's biggest coal generator says no to nuclear." In Australia, the conservative opposition parties have seized on nuclear power as the answer to all the country's problems. Australia has never had a nuclear power plant, and many of its grids, particularly the South Australian grid, are rapidly decarbonizing without them. This has profoundly irritated billionaires like Rupert Murdoch, who has turned his gigantic misinformation media empire in Australia into a monstrous nuclear power PR firm. But the people actually running Australia's grid understand that nuclear power takes too long and is too expensive. AGL, the company that owns 2 remaining coal plants, has plans to replace them over the next 10 years with wind, solar, and storage solutions. Rupert Murdoch and the conservative politicians he controls have called for those plants to be replaced by SMRs, small modular reactors. But AGL points out that it will be at least 10 more years before SMRs even come online, and that the power from those plants is expected to be incredibly expensive. Plus, last week's decision, barring Australia from dumping its nuclear wastes on indigenous lands, means that there is nowhere to dispose of the wastes a nuclear plant would generate. A spokesman for AGL said, "At AGL, we are focused on developing our renewable and firming pipeline, and we have no plans to invest in nuclear energy." Here in the United States, on August 8th, President Biden designated his fifth national monument. The Million Acre Monument has one of the longest names in national monument history, Baj Nahwavjo Ita Kukveni, Ancestral Footprints of the Grand Canyon National Mountain. Baj Nahwavjo in Havasupai means where indigenous people roam, and Ita Kukveni in Hopi means our ancestral footprints. The Million Acres includes over 3,000 culturally and archaeologically significant sites, cherished by many different tribes. It connects the Navajo Nation and Havasupai Indian Reservation. The proclamation cedes control of wildlife management in the monument to the state of Arizona. Hunting and fishing, trapping, and transplantation will all be allowed. Also, existing grazing permits for cattle will not be affected. It creates an advisory committee of sportsmen and ranchers that will control wildlife in the area. It also allows existing mining claims to stay in place and gives a green light to 2 mines that have already been approved. That includes the Canyon Mine, located 10 miles from the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The Canyon Mine, formerly known as the Pinyon Plain Uranium Mine, according to the Center for Biological Diversity, will cause permanent irretrievable damage to the Grand Canyon's aquifers and springs. In other words, this proclamation by President Biden is a typical green initiative that could cause as much or more environmental damage as it prevents. However, a positive story on President Biden. On August 9th, he traveled to New Mexico, where he gave a speech on clean energy at the Arcosa wind turbine tower manufacturing plant. We're going to do something a little different and play you an actual clip from his speech. In this clip, he's talking about renewable energy. Thankfully, he doesn't bring up nuclear power as a solution. We often criticize Biden for the bad parts of his energy policy, but we should acknowledge when he does something good. So here is that clip for you.
And we're seeing it right here in America. We're seeing it in New Mexico as well. In 2008, Solo Cup Factory shut down right here, right where we're standing. 200 people lost their jobs. Nearly a decade and a half later, a plastics company bought the site. It shut down after 3 years, laying off 100 workers. It's been idle ever since. Now it's coming alive again. Arcosa makes wind turbines, wind towers. That's the thing that holds most. When I say that, people look at me like, wind tower. You all know what a wind tower is. They look at me like, what the hell's a wind tower? That's a key component. You know, you have to have it to hold up those blades. You know how long, by the way, I was in eastern Colorado looking at the blades manufactured. Those blades are 103 yards long, longer than a football field. And by the way, they don't cause cancer. And by the way, wind energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. Solar energy is cheaper. A few years ago, business took a turn. They were forced to lay off 200 employees at plants all across America. Now, thanks to the new law I signed, making historic investments in clean energy, business is booming again. By the way, that we call it the Inflation Reduction Act, but within that is the act related to the climate. And it's $368 billion. And when I passed that, not one single guy on the other team voted for it. Nobody voted for it on the other team. Since I signed that law, bill into law, Arcosa has received $1.1 billion in orders for new wind towers. And today we're here breaking ground on a new plant that's going to create 250 new good-paying jobs. And meanwhile, we're speeding up permitting for transmission lines so wind energy produced by these towers reaches people's homes. Because what's happening now is It's hard to get these. A lot of these towers are old, and everybody is not in my neighborhood. They don't want a big new tower going up. So we're strengthening the towers, and we're going to go underground. It costs 6 times as much to go underground, but we're learning how to do that more cheaply, so it doesn't cause the forest fires and all the things that happen when major windstorms knock these lines down. My administration recently completed a review of a proposed Sunzee line, the transportation energy from a planned wind farm here in New Mexico and Arizona and California. So you're going to generate the wind here, the energy here, and be able to transmit it all the way across Arizona into California as well. These projects are expected to create 2,000 new construction jobs and up to 150 permanent jobs, providing clean energy for up to 3 million Americans. 3 million. And reducing the pressures of climate change. Like I said, Bidenomics is about bringing supply chains back home. Arcosa makes wind towers that's going to go into turbines made by GE Verona. I mispronounced it. Vernova in Florida and New York. Pattern Energy will use these turbines to build the largest wind farms in the Western Hemisphere, spanning Lincoln, Torrance, and San Miguel counties in New Mexico. And Sunzee will use that energy to power homes all across the Southwest. That's Bidenomics. It's cheaper. It's cheaper. That's what we're talking about, investing in America. You know, this company says investing they're making here is a direct result of the law we signed almost exactly a year ago, the most significant investment in clean energy in combating the existential threat of climate change ever anywhere in the world. Like I said, it's $368 billion. And Governor Lujan Grisham is leading the way, launching New Mexico Community Solar Program so families will save money on electric bills, stopping leaks of super polluting methane from oil and gas operations. We're capping thousands of those wells all across America, beginning in western Pennsylvania, coming west, and putting New Mexico on a path for a cleaner, cheaper electric transmission future as well, this state. Folks, when I think climate, I think jobs. I don't think all the dangers, there's real danger, but the jobs to fix the problem. My mother used to have an expression. After I lost my wife and daughter, she was trying to console me. She said, Joey, out of anything bad, something good will happen if you look hard enough for it. Well, all across America, we're looking. There are going to be a lot of good things that are going to happen as a consequence of this problem we're facing. What Arcosa is doing here is part of a much broader clean energy manufacturing. It's going to happen in big cities and rural communities as well. Like in Colorado, where CS Wind broke ground on what will be the world's largest wind tower manufacturing plant. And coincidentally, CS Wind is Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, you know, that very quiet Republican lady? It's in her district, who, along with every other Republican, voted against this bill. And it's making all this possible. And she railed against its passage. But that's okay, she's welcoming it now. When I ran for office, I promised to be president for all Americans. Whether you live in a blue state or a red state, I'm going to keep my promise. Before we made this historic clean energy investment, Siemens Corporation laid off workers who were making wind turbine parts and put the plant in Iowa and Kansas into what they now call, they refer to as hibernation. I hibernated in a while, Iowa for a while, but look, now we're reopening both these plants and rehiring workers. In New York, GE is investing $50 million for a new manufacturing assembly line making critical components for turbines in partnership with organized labor. Every one of these companies has pointed to the clean energy law that we originated and I signed as a reason for making these investments. And we're making sure rural communities are benefiting from these historic investments as well. It's not just urban areas. We're investing over $160 million in New Mexico to support conservation of climate-smart agriculture and forestry, like improved water management. We're grazing livestock in ways that improve soil health helping farmers and ranchers get paid for doing the right thing, planting material that absorbs carbon from the air.
His full speech, of course, can be found on whitehouse.gov. Now, this is a story you have probably heard about on the mainstream media or seen on social media. Dramatic video of the Maui town of Lahaina burning to the ground, taken by cell phones of people who had jumped into the ocean to avoid the flames, has been seen by millions of viewers. At the time of this recording, August 12th, the death toll stands at 80 people, but that count is expected to rise. According to CBS News, 1,000 people are still missing, and more than 1,000 homes have been destroyed. Fires continue to burn on Maui and the biggest island, Hawaii. In addition to the destruction of property, the Washington Post reports that drinking water has been contaminated by benzene as a result of water treatment plants burning. Maui has been suffering from reduced rainfall for months. That, combined with high winds from Hurricane Dora, created tinderbox conditions that caused flames to explode all over the island. Some survivors who jumped into the ocean describe flames keeping pace with them as they ran as fast as they could towards the sea. One of the most poignant images from Lahaina, from an ecological perspective, was row upon row of burned cars parked along the edge of the beach. The single biggest contributor to the global warming is the CO2 emitted by cars. Those cars, like all cars all over the planet, had done their part in changing the composition of our atmosphere. They were then destroyed by a disaster fueled by that change. We environmentalists have been warning that this kind of disaster would happen for decades now. And we are telling you now this will get much, much worse if we, as a society, don't stop putting carbon in the air immediately. We were right back when people called us doomsayers and no one changed their habits. We continue to be right now. Environmentalists strongly recommend you switch to electric vehicles in your personal life, and we as a society need to switch to carbon-free mass transit as soon as physically possible. On a related subject, Chevy has announced that it will not scrap its Bolt electric vehicle after all. The reason is the incredible demand from drivers. The Bolt is one of the cheapest new cars on the market, coming in at only $27,500 for the base model. It is also eligible for the $7,500 federal tax credit. In some states, there are also tax incentives to buy EVs, so the cost of a new Bolt could be less than $20,000. The Bolt has a range of about 250 miles on a full charge. GM has announced that future model years could utilize their Ultium battery platform, which could extend the range up to 400 miles per charge and allow acceleration of 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Chevy has also said that 70% of trade-ins from people who buy Bolts are from non-GM cars, so the company is looking at the Bolt as a way to introduce people to the brand. As we have reported in the past, sales of new electric vehicles have exceeded 7% in the US this year. This is seen as the tipping point where a rapid switch to EVs could be about to happen. Worldwide, EV sales are expected to be 18% of new cars sold in 2023, up from 14% in 2022. Much of those are being driven in China, where EV sales have skyrocketed. Of course, we're trailing far behind Norway, where EVs make up 91% of new car sales. Electric vehicles only need about 1/4 the power to move people and goods as compared to gasoline engines. This is because internal combustion engines are incredibly inefficient. So even in places where electric power is generated with coal and natural gas, like Michigan, less carbon is put into the air than with gas-powered cars. In places like Iowa, where wind energy provides 80% of the electricity, an EV's carbon footprint is negligible. One of the potential uses for EVs is as storage batteries for grid stabilization. The company Sunrun put out a press release back on February 6th announcing that they have begun a project that will use electric cars as storage batteries for the grid. When an electric car is plugged into the grid, power can flow in either direction, into the car's battery or out of it back into the grid. It has long been proposed that electric car batteries could create virtual power plants, potentially supplying gigawatts of power when demand is high, and then storing excess power when demand is low. Sunrun has partnered with PG&E to offer an initial 7,500 electric car owners the chance to participate in a pilot program to demonstrate this. California has millions of rooftops with solar. In fact, it has so much that rooftop solar electricity supply regularly exceeds demand at the sunniest parts of the day. The idea is this excess power could be stored in electric car batteries for use later in the day after the sun goes down. This would eliminate the so-called duck curve, the phenomenon created by the continuing demand for things like air conditioning after the sun sets. The connected batteries will discharge their power into the grid from 7 to 9 p.m. Participants will receive an upfront payment of $750 and a free smart thermostat. Sunrun estimates that it will be able to create a virtual power plant capable of supplying up to 38 megawatts, while still leaving enough energy in the batteries to provide backup power to homes. For our last story, we are returning to our more ordinary position of criticizing the Biden administration for their ecological decisions. On Friday, August 11th, the Biden administration announced it was spending $1.2 billion on 2 carbon sequestration demonstration projects. Carbon sequestration is literally sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. Most plans then pump the CO2 underground, just crossing their fingers and praying it will stay there forever. Carbon sequestration, or CCS, carbon capture and storage, is the favorite global warming strategy of fossil fuel companies. The idea that you can simply pull enough CO2 out of the air to stop global warming means that oil and gas companies would be free to suck every single gram of carbon out of the ground and keep making profit until the wells run dry. There are many fundamental problems with CCS, which means it will never actually be an effective strategy to fight global warming. One of the biggest is scale. You would need millions of carbon-sucking facilities, each larger than football fields, all over the country and the world, sucking out carbon 24/7 to significantly reduce the amount of carbon in the air. This would take an incredible investment in materials and manufacturing that would immediately put billions of tons of CO2 into the air. So all the CCS devices would start out with a carbon deficit and would have to spend some years running just to remove the carbon that was used in their own manufacture. A utility-scale wind turbine, on the other hand, earns back the energy used in its construction in a matter of months. Once you've created the machines, you still have to run them. That requires enormous amounts of energy, which means, again, more CO2 into the air. Another problem is that you have to move the CO2 to the holes in the ground where you're going to dump it. This necessitates construction of more pipelines, or at the very least, more stress on the already overstressed transportation network, with the attendant environmental damage. Scientists like Dr. Mark Jacobson, have called CCS a dangerous distraction. Nevertheless, Biden is betting heavily on it. For the $1.2 billion, 2 projects, one in Texas and one in Louisiana, are expected to remove 10 metric tons of CO2 from the air every day. However, like nuclear projects, CCS estimates are notorious for being wrong by orders of magnitude. Once the O2 is captured, no one knows what will be done with it. However, Biden has promised that this CO2, unlike previous projects, will not be used to enhance oil and gas fields. Oil and gas extraction by being pumped into old, tired oil fields. Well, that's it for our show this week. As always, you can send your feedback through texts to 419-973-5841, or you can send an email to joe@joedemar4agreenfuture.org. With this change to pre-recorded shows through the end of November, you won't be able to call in with comments, but please do let us know what you think. Longtime fans of the show may remember my first guest host back in April of this year. I look forward to being your voice on the air in the months to come. We hope you enjoyed it this week, and I'd like to think we can give you some small reason to hope for the future, or ideas for action you can take. It's been a difficult summer for gardens, especially our tomatoes this year, but the Ohioan wildflowers seem to be doing very well. We've got our own little patch of native wildflowers at our yard, sourced from the Wood County Parks District annual native plant sale. So we've got some brown-eyed Susans, coreopsis, and obedient plant. It gives me just a little spark of joy to see them grow. Some say it's too late for the future and that we're all basically doomed from this climate crisis. But we here at For a Green Future think it's not quite too late. And if we all work together and find hope in those little things, we can still save the earth. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!